Hello yet again, everyone. Welcome to our lecture series for Chapter 26 in your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. This chapter is entitled The Conservative Turn, 1969 to 1988. The first section of this lecture is simply entitled President Nixon. The focus question for this section is, what were the major policies of the Nixon administration on social and economic issues? Nixon very much ran as the conservative candidate in the 1968 presidential election. However, his presidency actually bridged the eras of liberalism and conservatism, and his policies came from the political center. He expanded many Great Society programs introduced by Lyndon B. Johnson and established new agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency. He signed both the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Air Act. He also actually proposed a minimum income for all Americans, a very progressive policy initiative. Conservatives attacked recipients of welfare as people who took money from honest taxpayers instead of working. But Nixon was willing to break the political mold here and go against his conservative partners there, but his proposal was rejected by Congress. Nixon's racial policies offered a similarly mixed picture. He actually pursued affirmative action programs, which were widely opposed by labor unions and, of course, his conservative partners. A big secret to Nixon's and the Republican Party's overall success in this period was Nixon's Southern strategy. This was based off a recognition of the changing demographics within the political parties in this period, and Nixon attempted to woo Southern Democrats over to the Republican Party. As many blacks abandoned the Republican Party for the Democrats, thanks to Democratic-led civil rights efforts in the 1960s, Republicans needed to replace those constituents to remain a viable and competitive political party. Republicans appealed directly to many of the racial grievances invoked by the civil rights movement among these Southern Democrats to win Southern support. And this Southern strategy basically completed the realignment of the political parties and cemented Republicans as the conservative party and Democrats as the liberal party. The South had been a Democratic stronghold since the end of Reconstruction, but this Southern strategy made the Southern states more competitive between the two parties. When it came to the issue of the courts during the Nixon administration, many conservatives hoped that Nixon would be able to appoint more conservative justices to the Supreme Court that would help reverse many of the more liberal activist decisions that were a legacy of the Earl Warren-led court of the Civil Rights era. When Warren stepped down as Chief Justice in 1969, Nixon appointed conservative Warren Burger as the new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and Burger was expected to reverse many of those activist decisions of his predecessor, Earl Warren. Unexpectedly, however, the Burger Court initially consolidated and expanded many of the judicial innovations of the 1960s. One of the more significant early decisions of the Burger Court was the issue of busing. Judges ordered the use of busing as a tool to achieve integration, where students of color from lower income areas would be bused to higher income, better served schools in order to balance the racial integration, and also, of course, in hopes to give these people of color from these more poor areas a better access to higher standards of education. Busing proved to be extremely controversial and helped to consolidate white hostility toward an active government. The courts also began to address some issues of affirmative action, and many whites viewed such programs as reverse discrimination. And in one particular case, the Regents of the University of California versus Bakke in 1978, the court rejected fixed racial-based quotas, but decided that race could be used as one factor among many in admissions decisions. Access to civil rights for certain minority groups was also expanded in the Nixon administration when they tackled issues of the rights of the disabled. This issue had strong bipartisan support during this period, and the first significant piece of legislation was the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And this act prohibited discrimination based on disability in federal agencies or any agency or place receiving federal financial assistance. As a result, many private and public buildings were redesigned to increase access for the disabled. The culmination of this movement was the passage of the Americans with Disability Act of 1990, and this banned discriminations for persons with disabilities in state and local government and in private employers. It required public spaces to install accommodations for the disabled across the board. The sexual revolution that emerged from the 1960s era countercultural movement became more or less mainstream in the 1970s. This led to an increased divorce rate and a decline in the birth rate as more and more women took control of their sexual natures and their body. A new law, Title IX, banned gender discrimination in higher education. And there was an increase in the total number of working women in the United States in this period. By 1980, 40% of all women were in the workforce, and that had increased to 55% by 1990. The gay and lesbian movement also expanded greatly in this period, and many more gays and lesbians felt empowered to, quote-unquote, come out of the closet and announce their sexual status to the world. This also led to the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from its list of mental illnesses, a major coup for the gay and lesbian rights movement. Nixon took a very different approach to foreign policy from that of his Cold War era predecessors, and many conservatives viewed Nixon as soft on communism. Nixon and his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, designed a more realist foreign policy that Kissinger dubbed realpolitik, which is a system of politics or principles based on practical rather than moral or ideological considerations. And this helped Nixon open the door to more negotiation with communist-led countries. And Nixon actually opened the door to China. And Nixon was the first American president to actually pay an official state visit to communist China. And this sparked a dramatic change in the relationship between the United States and China. Nixon and Kissinger's realpolitik ideas also led to the strategic arms limitation talks, which froze American and Soviet arsenals of intercontinental nuclear missiles. This in general ushered in a new era in which détente or cooperation would replace the hostility of the Cold War. That concludes part 1 of our Chapter 26 lecture series for your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. As always, study hard, and I'll see you soon.